Welcome back, it's Jennifer. A few days ago I showed you a technique where you could add ink into an embossing folder to get really cool results. Well, today I'm going to do a variation on that technique with watercolor. Now this technique is a little more artsy-fartsy. You're not going to get perfect results from it, but you get really cool watercolor effects with lots of texture. So I actually have 4 cards for you today, and they each have a little variation between them, so I'll walk you through all 4 of them. Now I used Tim Holtz Distress Inks because when they come in contact with water they kind of react and become watercolor-like. But you could by all means just use watercolor in place of the inks in today's technique. Now let's start with this card first. It creates kind of a nice soft look of watercolor with lots of texture. So this is the first technique. I have an embossing folder from Tim Holtz. I like these new embossing folders because they have small patterns. Now I'm going to use Tim Holtz Distress Inks, the mini ink pads. Because they're tiny, you can easily apply lots of different colors to a small area. So you see I'm just kind of smearing and dabbing it across the raised area of this embossing folder. For this technique, I'm using the side of the embossing folder where the raised part is the smallest amount of surface area. So you can see this is just raised lines. That's all that's to this side. And this gives you a softer look in the end because you're using less ink. Now that I've covered it with ink, I'm spritzing it about 10 or 12 times from about a foot above with a mist bottle. And I'm going to put my watercolor paper inside of it. I'm using Tim Holtz Distress watercolor paper. I love that paper. Now I'm running it through my die cut machine as I would any embossing folder. You can use these embossing folders with pretty much any machine. Now when I take it out, you see some splotchy areas. Normally on that paper, I just leave those splotchy areas and let them dry, but I wanted kind of a subtle look, so I wipe some of the splotchy areas away. And when this dries, it'll be a nice, beautiful watercolor wash with lots of texture. The thing you got to remember with distress inks and water is that they look better as they dry over time, so you can see the final results here. Now before we finish off the card, I wanted to show you how I did the backgrounds of the others. And this is another variation of the same technique. This one gives you more bold color to it, lots more color. This time I'm using the same embossing folder, but I'm inking the other side of the embossing folder. So this time I'm inking the side of the embossing folder that has more raised area. So you can see a lot more ink is going down this time. So this is going to give us a lot more color in the end. Now I'm using Distress Inks once again because when they come in contact with water, they react and become watercolor-like. So I get a watercolor look, but it's much easier to apply than watercolor. You could, however, put just mix up really high concentration of watercolor and paint it right into your embossing folder and get a similar effect. This is just easier to control. I like these mini ink pads because they are small enough to apply lots of different colors to a small area. So I misted it again 10 or 12 times from about a foot above. I'm going to put it through my die cut machine once again. You can see the watercolor already starting to work and push its way around. And when I put it through, it just squeezes all that watercolor into all the crevices, and you get much more bold color here, and you see some of the white showing through in the smaller areas. And I think this is just a beautiful way to create a very quick but colorful and texture-filled background. Now this next example is just like the last one. I just wanted to show you another variation of it using more masculine colors and using a different embossing folder. Now this one has a super tiny pattern. I think it's hard to find embossing folders with small patterns like this one, so I'm really appreciative of this one, but you could use any embossing folder for this technique. So I just thought this one was neat because with the small pattern in it, it kind of allows the color to stay in the smaller areas a little bit more, and you see more of the raised white when we're done. Now you could use the regular Distress Inks, ink pads, the full-size ones for this if you wanted to. I just really like these mini ink pads for small areas, and they've just released 3 more sets, so you've got lots of colors to choose from, and they're much cheaper than the regular ink pads. Okay, so now I've misted it once again. Running it through my die cut machine, you can see the ink just working its way through, and you end up with really cool watercolor in between all the white, and it just got some great texture to it. So fast and easy. And I thought this one would be good for a masculine card. For my 4th example, I'm going to do things a little bit different. This time I'm going to emboss first and then put watercolor on top of it. This gives a more controlled look, so if you like a cleaner look, this might be good for you. Also, I used a diffuser to create this open area that remains unembossed. So this is what a diffuser is. It's a Tim Holtz product. There's different ones available. It's very thick with an open window in the center. Now you use this in place of one of your cutting plates when you're using embossing folders. So I have some watercolor paper here, same as before, and I've picked an embossing folder from Tim Holtz that has a small pattern. I think these small patterns work well with the diffuser because it makes a more defined edge, but you can use any embossing folder with the diffuser. So now what I'm going to do is run this through my die cut machine like I would any embossing folder. However, I'm using the diffuser in place of one of the plates. Now I think what you're supposed to do is put the diffuser down first, your embossing folder, and then a cutting plate on top and run it through that way. I did it backwards here, which may mess up your machine. So please do it the other way. Don't do as I say, not as I do, but it worked for me and you can see what I'm doing here. I've lined up the circle where I want it to be on that watercolor piece and I'm running it through my machine. So I'm not using two cutting plates, I'm just using one cutting plate in the diffuser. This works great at leaving a center area, that circle area, unembossed when you use embossing folders. He has several different diffusers. Some have rectangles or oval shapes. This circle happens to be my favorite. So this is a great way to add a sentiment to a one-layer card with embossing around it. Now for this circle, I wanted to have like a defined edge on here. This is how I find I get best results in doing it. I have a foam mat here and a kind of mouse pad would work. I have my diffuser here. I'm going to lay it right on the circle and take a stylus and firmly go around that open circle and really press in a line. And this will give like a raised edge around the circle, a nice definition. By the way, I am doing this to the back of the paper so that the raised edge will be on the front of the paper. So you can see here the nice definition you get from that. And I do it a couple times to really make sure that I get that nice line around the edge of the circle. Very quick and easy to do. So now it's time to apply the color. I have the positive piece. This comes with the diffuser. This is just one of the plates. And I'm just going to use it as a mask here and hold it over that center part without the embossing while I ink around it. Now I'm using an ink blending tool with my Distress inks and I'm lightly applying some ink over the embossed area. You can see the raised areas capture most of the ink and are more, kind of gives a more intense color on the raised areas. A little ink gets in between, but that's okay. You'll also notice that I'm using a very unusual color combination here. That's because these colors, these four colors came together in a packet of mini Distress inks, and I was intrigued by the colors. They were unusual and I thought they were fun. The nice thing about Distress inks is they blend well together and they don't get muddy, so you can take two very unusual colors and get them to blend together. So I don't have to worry about how it's going to turn out, but I could still end up using some fun colors. You could try this technique with other dye inks and you could get a similar effect, but they definitely work better with Distress inks because the water will react with these. You could also do a light wash of watercolor over this embossed pattern and the raised areas will capture some more of the ink or some more of the color and give a similar result. I just thought this was much easier because you get more control over how the ink goes down. Okay, so now that I have applied all of the ink, I'm going to put that circle right back in place. By the way, I mess it up here, but I'll show you how to fix that later. I'm going to put that circle right in place, and I'm going to spray the living daylights out of this piece. So I've got some water here. I'm going to spray from about a foot above. I always go high above, and mist this quite a bit. And I'm going to mist it so much that almost when you pick it up, a little bit of water might drop off of it. But that's okay, because the more water you use, the more blending that will occur here. It's going to look bad right now, but when this dries, you'll end up getting a nice soft watercolor look with lots of really nice blending. Really, the water does all the work for you. And here you can see the softness that you get from that technique. It's just beautiful in real life. Okay, so now let's assemble these cards. I did all the stuff on top of these cards, very simple design because I wanted the background to shine. I'm using this die set from Avery Elle. What's neat about it is there's banners and shapes that put embossed little dots around the edge. If you watch any of my videos, you know that I like the faux stitched edges, dies that offer that. This is fun too because it does little debossed dots, and I thought that would be fun with the background that we have with the embossing. So I'm going to cut this from watercolor paper just so that the feel of this paper matches the background, and check out those little dots around the edge. I just think that's so fantastic and so much more interesting than just a plain strip. This is the stamp set I'm using from Mama Elephant. Ignore all the rest of the stuff in the back right here. I ended up changing it, but I wanted you to see that stamp set. It's got some really unique sentiments on it. I'm going to use my powder tool to prevent any static and stamp on here with Versamark ink, and then I'm going to use that handy dandy embossing powder that seems to work with any style of card, and it is liquid platinum from Ranger. This stuff is like a warm silver and it's just beautiful. So I'm going to go ahead and add it to this piece and zap it with my heat gun, and you get a really nice metallic finish. For another one of the cards, I'm using the same die set for the banner, but I switched up the sentiment. This is an Avery L stamp set. I love all the handwritten kind of calligraphy greetings. This one's going to say birthday wishes, and I think I'm going to use this on the masculine kind of colored card and put some stars on with this one. When you keep your card design simple, you can use some really fun sentiment stamps. For my next one, I'm using this new stamp set from Mama Elephant. I really love the sentiment on here that says, miss you more than just a little. And even though this is a cutesy stamp set, the sentiment from it can be used for other styles too, like I'm doing today. So now that I've heat embossed all those and have them ready, I'm going to add them to my cards with some foam tape. I have trimmed down all my watercolor backgrounds and glued them onto a regular white note card, keeping this very simple. And I think by adding foam dots behind these banners, it really makes it pop. Now I'm using my new longer Tim Holtz Distress scissors. These scissors are awesome. I'm so glad they're available in longer size now because these can cut through absolutely anything and they don't get all sticky. Okay, now for this card, remember I got some ink where I didn't want it. All I'm going to do, I've done this trick a bazillion times in my videos because I mess up a lot. You just softly scrape the surface with the side of a craft knife and then use any kind of eraser to kind of buff the surface kind of smooth. And that's a great way to remove any ink from a part of your project where you kind of messed up a bit. And I am a big believer in trying to rescue any pieces that you can. Okay, back to that Mama Elephant stamp set again. I'm just going to stamp this in the center here with Versamark and again add that liquid platinum embossing powder. Now with these backgrounds, Distress inks want to hold embossing powder, so you'll see I get some powder over on the color on the side. I'm just going to use a brush to brush that away, but it's something to keep in mind when you're adding embossing powder to a card. With Distress ink, that Distress ink might hold it, so you could use an anti-static tool to remove some of that if you wanted to. Okay, so now that we have all these cards done, I did want to add just a few little hearts and stars kind of scattered on the cards, something simple and interesting. And if you have seen my videos before, you know that I love to die cut little hearts and stars and add those as embellishments. Well, I wanted those to match the embossed sentiments, so I'm going to create some paper that is exactly like the embossed sentiments. I just have some white cardstock, covered it with Versamark. I'm going to add liquid platinum embossing powder and then heat this, and we'll end up with a cardstock that has that metallic silver finish just like the sentiments. So now I'm going to cut a bunch of shapes from this little piece here. I'm going to use the Simon Says Stamp heart die set, and also this die set that does hearts and sequins and stars from Mama Elephant. I'm going to run this through my die cut machine, and then I'll end up with little stars that I added with just a touch of liquid adhesive. You can see the stars here on this card, and on the other cards I used some of the hearts. You could have stamped and embossed these hearts just the same, but I think adding that little bit of dimension by gluing them on adds a little bit of fun. So there you have a way you can use your embossing folders with a watercolor look. It's really fun to do and very quick and easy. As always, you can look in the YouTube description below or over at my blog for links to a few different sources for the products that I use. Over on my blog, I'll also have much more information on these cards, links to additional videos with similar kind of techniques, and also a giveaway of 3 sets of the mini Distress ink cubes that you saw me use today. Thanks so much for stopping by and hope to see you again soon.